Hello, my name's Dan Hadaway, and this is CyberViews. Today, I'd like to introduce Eric Hulmes, an Indiana farmer who has witnessed firsthand the rise of technology in agriculture. Now, like most farmers, his career actually started the day his mom came home from the baby hospital, right? But seriously, he started his farming career when he bought his first farm in 1987, when he was still a senior in high school. Eric, tell us about yourself.
Good morning, Danny. We farm in northern Indiana here. Um, Currently, my two sons work with me and farm a little bit of their own ground. But I this family farm. Dad started farming several years ago. Started in Illinois. We moved to Indiana in '73. We basically grow corn, soybeans, a little bit of wheat, and occasionally rent some ground out to the local potato farm. Um, it's still considered a family farm, but in today's world, it's a business. So if you don't run it as a business, it's not going to be a business.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, now we're if you don't run your farm like a business, you don't really have a farm to run, right? So that's
Yep. Yeah, it's all money anymore. It's no different than anything else. We do have the luxury of, like I say, still being a family farm to where it allows us to do a little bit more, a little bit of extra things that keep the family participation in it and make it a lot more fun and a lot happier place to work. But
well, and what my audience, most of them probably already know, is I was born and raised on a farm, so to speak. And my dad, my grandpa really always used to say, this is a way of life. And I'm been running a technology firm for 23 years, where we really emphasize culture, and we talk to our employees about the forever employee, and that this is a way of life. Even though if we don't run our company like a business, we're not going to have a company. Is it like that in farming as well?
absolutely, absolutely, you still got to make the day-to-day to this, pardon me, the day-to-day decisions that are going to affect your bottom line, regardless of where the family is in it or not. The blessing is that we have the family to be able to fall back on and help make those decisions. But yes, it's definitely a business, and you have to treat it as one. Whether it's your financing or anything else. So you have to make the best business decisions on whatever uh, situation comes up in front of you at the day. So
So, in our business, we talk about, that we're a table, right? We have four legs holding us up. It's safety, service, culture, and growth. And it seems to me that in the family farm, it's kind of the same thing. That culture aspects of it, the fact that, when we came out to visit you, we met your two sons, and they really knew what they were doing, by the way. And it seemed like everybody knew what was expected of them, but you still have the camaraderie of working with your family, and we're all in this together, and that cultural aspects of it. Is that, I mean, I feel like what you're saying is that there's really a lot of resonance and small businesses, period, that running a small business is still a way of life. We just have to make sure that growth or profit or whatever the metric is an important part of that small business. We on the same page
absolutely,
there, Eric?
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
how do you describe the size of your operation, the type of operation, that sort of thing?
Uh, in today's scale in the world, we're probably a small to mid-sized farm. We're farming about 3,000 acres. Um,
Wow.
we do a little bit of custom work on the side too. We've actually downsized in the last couple of years just due to labor shortages and trying to keep it a little bit closer, you know, uh, tight knit family type operation. Not saying that the right opportunities come along that we can't grow or won't grow. It's just we decided to focus on some of the higher earning aspects of it for us, and and hopefully maybe find that next employee that maybe will allow us to go to the next level. Because you start stretching yourself too thin in any type of business, and it just makes it that much more difficult and harder to be profitable.
So, so it's 3,000 acres, wow. Just so you know, my dad and and his partner, my uncle Hadaway Brothers was the name of the business, right? And I thought we had a huge farm. Now, we also had livestock, but we had like 1,800 acres at the peak. And so 3,000 acres as a small family farm is still, to me, that's a lot of work. That's what I remember about, the crops part of farming, is how much work was involved in, getting those crops in the ground and then keeping the weeds out of them and then getting them out of the field. So,
Yeah.
but I also heard you talk about potatoes. Do you raise potatoes then, or tell us a little bit about that? Is that like a side product or anything like that, or?
So in our situation, we have it's basically almost a corporate farm, but it's they actually grow potatoes. They're in, I think, 9 or 10 different states now. They're based out of North Dakota, but they're only a couple miles away from my shop. And they actually come in and rent the ground from us, and all we basically have to do is provide the pivot irrigation, which we do. We're probably about 60% irrigated here where we're at, and they will only plant the potatoes under the irrigation because they require a lot of water, a lot of management to keep them cool and to be able to provide the fertility they need. So we're really blessed there. It's a great market to get into, and they're close enough that we can take advantage of them. And good company to work with. It's not where we put a lot of acres in every year, but we're available. We're able to put a few acres in and really capture a nice financial increase on those acres occasionally. But it is tough on the soil, and they don't want it year after year. So
Very good. So really, it's just more of and a lot of my clients are banks, and one of the big things they're all wrestling with right now is big tech companies. They call them fintech companies are needing a place to deposit money, and they're needing to be able to say, hey, we can provide banking services, but they don't want to spend the money on the regulations, and so they're offering their banking as a service is what they're calling the process of doing that. And I feel like what you're saying there is that you're taking really good care of the land. One of the things I've learned in talking to you, Eric, is that when we talk about technology in farming, it's not just about the IT, it's the technology of disease control, the technology of keeping that land the kind of land that a potato farmer would want to plant their potatoes on, right? And so, I mean, does it have, like, is it, they always want to come in after the soybeans, not the corn, because the soybeans put nitrogen into the ground, or is there anything technological about that potato part of the operation?
on the potato side, they generally prefer to come in after corn. And
Really?
it really
Cool.
has more to do with the herbicides that are used on a corn crop versus a bean crop. Um, they're So the corn crop herbicides are generally more relaxed. I guess is a poor word, but they're more conducive to growing a potato crop. We don't have as much crossover problems that we would with some of the soybean chemistry we use. They will go on soybeans, but they really want to know what your chemistry program was the year before they'll make that decision.
And that right there is a big change. My dad never used the word chemistry, other than you better pass your chemistry class, right?
Yeah,
But if I was to follow in his footsteps and be a farmer, I would be very well off because I passed that chemistry class. From
sure.
what I'm, from listening to you and your sons and your hired man talk, chemistry is a huge part of farming now. Just drying the corn to be able to, take it to market. There's requirements now where when my dad was a farmer, it was more kind of a premium, almost a favor to the, to the elevator is what we called the place we took our corn.
Sure.
And so that's just fascinating how, it's really interesting to me because I grew up on a farm before technology was a big thing in farming. And I'm coming back to it, having, went on about my life and not really paid attention to it. It's almost there's a huge quantum leap.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
yeah, so I guess a big question then is, when did you first notice the quantum leap, Eric? When did you first start saying, wow, technology is starting to become a big part of the operation?
So I guess the beginning one would be for my operation. We bought a new tractor in 2005, I believe it was, a new John Deere, and they offered the auto steer package in it, and I opted to go that route. And when we got it in that fall, I believe, um, it was more of a gimmick at the time. Nobody really put a lot of faith in it, but it was sold to the way they approached it was it would really alleviate the fatigue factor. When you're sitting in a tractor for 10, 12, 15 hours a day, 20 hours a day, depending on, what you got going on, it takes a lot of the fatigue out of it. Being an old farm kid, I'm sitting in a tractor driving a tractor, but boy, after operating it for about 3 hours, it just really, really was amazing how much more relaxed I was. And even going home at night, and being able to wind down and go to bed, you could really tell I wasn't as tense. I was more relaxed, especially when you added that auto steer into the planting operation where I could focus on making sure the planter was functioning correctly and keep an eye out for different things going wrong there. And I didn't have to worry about trying to drive straight because I want it to look good and have a nice appearance. And it really alleviated a lot of fatigue. And that was just, that was the beginning. And at that point, it just it advanced so quickly, and then probably in that 2012 to 2015 range was where we really started utilizing the variable rate technology, which we started on our planter and our planting operations first, where we could variable rate our seed populations, correlated with our soil types and our management zones. So basically, wherever we were going to create a higher yield or produce a higher yield on the better soil, it automatically would tell the planter to plant more plants. And then in reverse on the poorer soil types, we could drop it down to where we're not using excess seed that we don't need, that in lack of a better term, if you put too many seeds out on poor ground, actually you're putting some weeds out there to get in the way. It's just too much. And then it just kept hurtling forward, and we started variable rating fertilizer and nitrogen and everything. We basically, at this point, we variable rate every product put on this farm with the exception of chicken litter. That's the only product on this farm that we actually flat rate. I believe it makes us better stewards of the land first and foremost, but it's an economic decision, where you're not wasting seed, you're not wasting fertilizer, you're not over applying, which, back in the day when they didn't have the technology, you didn't under fertilize, so you were always putting on too much, and it's no disrespect to my father and my grandfathers. It's just the way it was back in the day.
Yeah, we
And
didn't have the technology. So far, Eric, I mean, I feel like we've already kind of four different technology types or, have come up. I mean, we talked about, I would call it maybe safety technology, the technologies involved in making your job easier so you're not as fatigued. Gosh, I remember when I was a 13-year-old boy, I worked 16-hour days. There's no, I mean, it's why I'm not afraid to work now, I mean, but
sure.
fatigue was a part of being a farmer back in those days. And I remember your hired man when we were talking to him, basically saying that, I mean, You guys would make a decision, all depending on how well the weather is treating you and stuff. But a lot of times you would go home before it even got dark, which, we'd be combining until 10 o'clock at night if it was dry enough. You know what I'm saying? And so,
Yeah.
but that's just one of the technologies. The variable rate technology you just talked about, the chemistry technology, which kind of applies to that. When I was riding the combine with you, which, by the way, thank you very much. That was a lot of fun.
Glad to have
Yeah,
you.
I mean, can you imagine if I didn't grow up on a farm? It'd be really fun, you know what I mean? But maybe the funness of it to me was looking at the iPad and listening to you talk. You knew, hey, by the way, coming up here, the ground is going to get a little bit different. I mean, when we looked at farms as a kid, it was like, that's a rocky farm, that's clay, but it was the whole farm. You're looking at, all right, now we're getting into the clay, now we're getting into the rocks, I mean, that sort of thing, which of course, those weren't the words you were using. You were using much more chemistry oriented, or geology probably oriented terminology that must just come from the technology that you're using. Can you talk a little bit about that iPad on your, you know, combine?
So basically, we started utilizing that iPad with another company we work with, and it's mapping everything that we're doing. So whatever, if we're planting or harvesting or side dressing nitrogen, um, we link it to the iPad to be able to download that data on the iPad, and then that data number one, it's streamed live or immediately to my agronomist, which we work very close with. But then a lot of it goes into iCloud, and then we actually downloaded in our particular situation. John Deere has an app center that we work with, and basically we can collect all this data, or we collect all this data, and we keep track of all this data, and then we'll take it from planting to fertilizing all the way through harvest, and then we compile all that data and we create basically management zones, and it's all based on yield. So when we collect that harvest yield, then we can go back and look, hey, we planted 34,000 population on this particular soil type. Did we get the yield that we were shooting for? What do we need to do to get to that next level? Or, hey, we really nailed it. Now we've got that dialed in. We know how to manage that particular soil type on that particular farm for the future. And then from all that collective data, then that's how we'll create our prescriptions for the following year, whether it be seeding population, fertility, whatever the case may be. And in turn, we'll go through while we're harvesting, at the time, or putting on nitrogen, and we'll flag areas in the field, whether we have a weed problem, or, and like in the simplest terms, hey, you found a big rock right there, hit the flag on the iPad, we link it to something else, we can go back and find that rock immediately, get it the heck out of there. And it's been a valuable tool, and I'm blessed to have my sons on the operation, which are a little bit more IT savvy than I am.
Yes.
So, they really understand the technology a lot better. Some of it's still a little Greek to me, but it's that
What
we just try to compile all the data to create, a better business model for the future into the next year.
Well, what I was really struck by is, and it's this way in every small business, but not only were you had a command as we were combining through the field of the metrics or the KPIs, the key performance indicators, yield, but also I imagine you can count up that rock had 20 or that field had 20 rocks or whatever, right? But your sons and your hired man, even they were keeping track of how many loads we've dumped this year. And I never thought to ask them, but in my mind, at least when I was on the farm, I'd be thinking last year it took us X number of loads, so we're halfway done or whatever. assuming we do as well as last year. Hopefully we do better, and I mean,
Sure.
and by the way, talking about good motivation to get those last loads in is we're kicking last year's butt, right? I mean, that's what KPIs are all about. But the iPad, I want to make sure I don't, because I also feel that mobility, these things right here, right? iPhones, and that's
Sure.
my dog on my iPhone there, but you know, they really have had an impact on all businesses, whether we decided to adopt them or, consciously said, hey, I'm going to use my iPhone for this or my iPad for that. And a great example is, and I want to get this story in mainly from my mom, because my mom's uncle, Uncle Mike, we called him, was a real old guy to me, which, now I realize he was about my age at the time. But he had a terrible arthritis problem. And my dad and my uncle, at one time, my uncle asked my dad, I overheard them, and my uncle was like, are we sure we want to, use Mike next year? And my dad was like, yes, we have to keep Mike on board the team because he's my weather vane. I mean, he's the person that helps us know when there's going to be rain coming, all because his arthritis would flare up in the humidity.
Oh yeah,
Nowadays, I don't have to be a farmer to know that I can just go to the Weather Channel and get, the best we can get, at least at predicting weather. Which, is it perfect? No, but it's certainly a lot better than asking the arthritis guy, how's your joints feeling today, right? Tell me
absolutely.
about other mobility advantages that you're getting from that iPad, or from just the fact that you're using, mobile technology in the farming business.
Well, but in the past, without the iPad, when you went and sat down, for me, when I went and sat down with my agronomist, I'm taking a stack of folders, and digging through paperwork, and taking half a day to basically now what we can just, print out reports real quick or pull up reports on the iPad and sit and talk. And, we've cut our time considerably by, having that data right there, taking it, to our meetings, and sitting down, and having those conversations. And basically it's as simple as what you said too, my son in the auger cart, you've seen him, he has an iPad in his machine also. And he's not so much collecting data, but he's watching the markets. He's getting weather alerts. He's watching the weather. Corn's not as big a deal when we're harvesting corn, but when we're harvesting soybeans, we really want to know, hey, the rain's going about here. We don't want them to get wet. It's really made us a little bit more open to that, technology, to be able to use that to avoid some catastrophic situations, weather related catastrophic situations where we don't get a load of beans, rained on or something, that they can soak it up really quick. But uh, those sorts of things have really, it's helped on the aspect of convenience. But collectively, we have all that data in one piece of equipment now. Rather than like I said earlier, trying to take a stack of folders and dig through and try to put it all back together. Here we already have it. It's already compiled. Just saves a lot of time, a lot more convenient. And then we have it throughout the year too. We can go back out. We basically, if we're scouting the field, if my agronomist is not out there and I'm out there and I see a problem, there again, we're flagging it. I'm sending it to my agronomist. Let's check it out. Let's see what's going on. And basically that one program that we work with FieldView, um, they actually, they keep um, they're looking at plant health all year long because they have all this data. So they're sending me reports all the time, emails, hey, here's your plant health quality right now. And they're compiling some suggestions of, hey, you need to keep an eye on this. It's also, um, since they already have that collected data and they have it on a per field basis, it's, I believe it's linked through NOAA, but I will get precipitation reports. So if we get a rain event, I can go to my iPad and I can pull up field by field within about a tenth of an inch how much rain each farm has gotten,
Wow,
which is a really nice aspect for us,
definitely.
especially with the pivot irrigation. We can manage our irrigation a little bit better with that. There's a multitude of different things that it has improved, um, and sometimes it's overwhelming how much data we have, and how to even interpret it all to get the best result out of it. But it's it's a lot different than it was when I started.
That just reminds me of when, my dad and my uncle decided, hey, we're going to put a rain gauge on every one of our fields. And then, like, at the end of the year, they're like, that didn't work because, you couldn't tell between a tenth of a net. You couldn't get that detailed on it, right? But what I'm hearing you say is not only do you know how much rain was in this field, but it was really broken down by where the rain fell in the field. Am I getting that right too? Or
Yes, yeah, to a degree, and something I guess I didn't mention earlier. We actually farm in 3 different counties, so we're 20 miles from tip to tip, and from across to cross. So it to try to drive around and check everything,
yeah,
and
yeah.
have a multitude of rain gauges, it doesn't really work. You can have the best of intentions, but time still is a factor. Um, so it really gives us a broader spectrum, and as erratic as the weather is anymore, we can literally have. Well, we had an event this spring that the south farms only had 2.5 inch, yeah, I think 2.5 inch rain. The northeast farm had 8.25 in one of them. And boy, you want to talk about a management decision, then try to figure out what the devil to do and how to maintain things at that point. But we had the tools, we knew what was going on, and we weren't relying on the neighbor to say, hey, this is what we had.
Well, and that, I mean, boy, you know, it, I feel like back to the mobile technology, I mean, my dad and my uncle were there was almost a habit. They knew when it was going to be noon because they had to be by a radio at noon in order to keep tabs on the market,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the market report, I think it was Orion Samuelson or
Oh
whatever,
yeah.
the
Yep.
guy, and they had to listen to the market report. And and then there will be a lot of times where they're like, I would always check when our bus always went right by the elevator, and I would
Mm-hmm.
always check what the price of corn and beans were in case they needed to know because they missed the market report or whatever, right? And so, but now you just go to your phone, right, and or your iPad or whatever, and you've got the market report. One of the things you've been talking about that I definitely want to make sure we discuss, because my dad had a host of people he would, consider to be resources. I mean, Uncle Mike was a resource, right? But he would spend a lot of time going back and forth to the University of Illinois Extension office, and really, they would be helping them determine what kind of weed seed or, various, problems, diseases, that sort of thing. And what I'm gathering from listening to your, explanations is that you have a consultant, an agronomist. Am I saying that right? Um,
Agronomist. Mm-hmm.
agronomist, who is kind of really helping you not only with the technology, the IT stuff, the data collection, that sort of thing, but also with the chemistry, with the variable rates, with new technologies. I mean, I'm getting the impression that this particular entity is really a part of your team as much as your sons and your hired men are. Am I getting that right?
He is, without a doubt, as valuable as my sons, with the exception that he's not related to me. But yes, I
Yes.
I would not want to farm without him. The vast amount of knowledge that he has, on fertility, on chemistries, and you have to have a feel for that. You have to have a flair for that. And he's not afraid to push the boundaries to try to get to that next level. And he's a realist. He doesn't buy into a lot of the snake oils, as we call them. there's always somebody out there selling some joy juice that, it's going to add 5-10 bushel. Well, we got to be realist about it. And uh, but yes, his knowledge, and I've been working with him for probably close to 20 years now. Fantastic person. Um, Knows what my goals are. I know what his goals are. We have a great working relationship. Um, right now he is actually on all of my forums. He can access all that data immediately. Um, so he can compile and start putting things together. Usually we start harvesting if that farm's on the list to be soil sampled. He's in the field while we're still picking.
Nice.
He's just excited and ready to go and get things figured out and plan for the future. So yes, he is a very, very important part of this farming operation. Um, if you're, and the problem is, you get to a certain point, you just don't have time to do it all yourself. And you really, you know, unless you're in God's country, whether it's in the middle of Illinois or the middle of Iowa, where they get rain every week and a half, and they have two soil types. They don't have quite the issues we do. In our part of northern Indiana, we are extremely variable soil types. We may change soil types 3, 4, 5 times in a half-mile stretch, and for a lot of people, that's unfathomable to think about, but it's reality for us. And it takes an extreme amount of management to try to push the envelope to get our yields up to where we're competitive with the central Illinois and things like that. And he is a key part of that. And he's a darn good steward too. He knows what our goals are, as far as keeping our land healthy and doing our due diligence for Mother Nature on top of it. So,
What I really am also been struck by is that not only did you several times when I was riding that combine with you, but your sons as well used the phrase steward of the land. And I felt like that was just kind of getting started when, my dad was retiring. The whole notion of soil conservation and that sort of thing. And so I'm just struck by how that has changed. I'm sure technology has helped with that, but also seems to be a shift in understanding that we have an extremely valuable resource here in America called farmland. And it's great that farmers see part of their role now is to make sure that we're preserving the value of that land. What kind of technologies, and I'm throwing this at you, it's certainly not a question I said we were going to ask, but are there technologies that really kind of lend to that you can, discuss? Or
yeah, I mean, you can implement a lot of it into any situation. There's I don't know if I would refer to it as a kind of a technology, but we're experimenting with a lot more cover crop situations where on our lighter soils we put something on it to hold it down. And in certain situations where our intentions are in the future here, we're going to start actually variable rating our cover crop, pardon me, where we're maybe not so much doing the whole field or the whole farm, but hitting the tough spots, the sand hills or the places where the water might, hilly situations where we're just focusing on those situations versus doing the whole farm. It's really tough to say that there's one management style that works for an entire farm. There again, if you're 1 or 2 soil types, yes, you can get away with it. But in our geographical area, it's just a pretty tough situation. We go from no-till to conservation till to minimum till to maximum till. It just depends on what farm, what operation, what our goals are, or plans for the future are. But there again, when you start working with the cover crops, then you're working with different chemistries in the springtime to control those cover crops too. So yes, there is a lot of technology involved in that. And on the plus side of it, we found a real boost in our weed control. We're getting considerably better weed control where we're working with cover crops and then coming back in and either no tilling into those situations or minimum tilling into those situations. So there is, there is some benefits to it, and for sure, just doesn't work for everywhere all the time. So.
So, we're in the business of risk management, and I maintain that everybody's in the business of risk management. And so there's really three processes that apply to every type of risk management situation. A, you measure the risk. B, you respond to the risk. And C, you monitor that response. And so to me, you start off answering that question by saying that you really don't see technology as being, the steward of the land, but really, to me, it's all the measuring that you're doing that's helping you know where the soil is light, and so we need to put a cover crop there. Economically, if you know that, hey, it's going to be worth planting, I suppose, wheat or oats or something, is that what we're talking about? So in the
Wheat,
winter,
oats, cereal, rye. I mean, there's a giant pot you can choose from out there, depending on what works on your farm. But yes. Mm-hmm.
and so if you have a 100-acre field, and my dad would be like, well, we could plant wheat to save the soil there. Man, that's a lot of money. And wheat, the price of wheat in the 70s was terrible. Till the, Afghanistan. The point being is that if you know that, hey, if we go out and plant wheat on 40 acres of this 100-acre field, we're going to save the field. That makes it more of an achievable goal. Am I hearing you say that right?
Yes, absolutely. It is. But there again, I mean, it's an acceptability level of whether, you have to put faith into the operation you're doing, and you have to believe in what you're doing. And for a farmer, it's all, we're all from Missouri. Show me. You got to prove to me,
Yes.
and that's what we're seeing. And it's working for us. I'm not saying it's going to work for the neighbors. You get two farmers to agree on something, you've really accomplished something, because it's pretty tough sometimes. But
now that's the part that hasn't changed.
No, sir.
Farming.
No, sir. And it works for us, doesn't work for the neighbors. We're trying to implement it more. But it's just basically it's what you're comfortable doing. And it's just another management level, and we really struggled this year with the way the fall, way the weather stacked up on us and everything. It was just a struggle getting all the cover crops out we wanted to put out this year. So.
But for the sake of my audience, do you see how it works in risk management? I mean, you're measuring, and that helps you respond to that risk. And then at the end of the year, you sit down with your agronomist, you go over all the data. Your agronomist is the expert at deciphering and interpreting that data. And then you create new action plans. That's the monitoring process, right? And Absolutely. So you're right back to where you start. You got your measurements, and next year you're going to respond to that risk in a little bit different a way than you did this year based on what you learned this year. Am I summarizing that correctly?
Absolutely. I would say that's a very good summary.
Yep. I will have to say the one thing that struck me the most, are you wearing a John Deere hat today, Eric?
Yeah. Yes, I am.
Yeah, I have to say that on the way back, of course, I was with my daughter and my son-in-law. And on the way back, we were reflecting on, wow, we were able to ride in that combine. And our notion was, well, what, if I spend $1 million on something, I'd want to show it off too. You know what I'm saying? And so,
well, that's what I always said. I bought a $300,000 hat and they threw in a tractor.
There you go. That's a good way of putting it. And for my audience, yes, I am wearing a different hat. It is my summertime hat there.
We need to get a John Deere emblem for that thing.
Yes, we need a John Deere emblem up there. So Eric, while we were there visiting you, I was kind of starting to get concerned about all of this data collection that we're doing. And, I'm being that I'm in the cybersecurity business. One of the big things we talk to our banking clients about is control of the data. Who owns the data? What are they doing with that data? Are they using that data to train AIs so that you're no longer necessary? So what are your thoughts about that? Is your agronomist helping you with those types of questions, or where do you stand on the fact that John Deere probably knows everything more about your farm than you do?
It is a little bit nerve wracking, and the question of who owns it, technically, like, we're told we own it, but just because we own it doesn't mean everybody else and his brother gets to look at it. And where does it end? Whether the chemical companies own it, the John Deere company, or whoever the case may be. All that data is just sitting out there. It's when you're dealing with some of these larger companies, not so much John Deere, which take it for what they're worth, but the other companies that we deal with, I'm not even sure. I've not researched it enough to know whether it's even a U.S. based company. So, how much of this data possibly China has, or other countries that may have. And it's a little bit alarming. It could come back to bite us in the butt at some point, I suppose. But it is, as far as the agronomists know, I mean, we all believe our data is secured, but that's not necessarily always the truth.
Well, and then there's the availability risk. I mean, and I had made an intention to kind of start Googling and researching the notion of who controls the satellites, because I mean, am I correct? I've spoken to farmers who their lightning struck their pump house and they lost their ability to harvest for a day or whatever. And so, knowing how IT works, knowing that you're probably relying on satellites to get that data to the servers that are aggregating it, who controls those satellites? Would one of the things that an enemy of the United States be able to do is shut off your ability to harvest or plant or fertilize, or whatever you do in between planting and harvesting, right? But the other aspects of the data collection that kind of interest me are kind of, I always remember my dad would always be, this, of course, he's no longer with us anymore, and neither is the neighbor that he would wonder about. But my dad seriously did sometimes say, our weeds are coming from his farm, and diseases even. And so I feel like if you're collecting that data, maybe not the weeds, but it would be, to me, an added benefit if you notice that, hey, there's a disease on this farm, so let's go ahead and put this treatment on ours because we know it's eventually going to make its way over here. Is there any data sharing going on like that?
Not, I guess I want to say not freely. We do have a pretty good network of neighbors, and I believe every place does, and as long as you're not that guy, they're all going to share, hey, we've got this situation going on, you might want to keep an eye out on it. And, with our agronomists, we're really proactive. So, not a lot of my neighbors have an agronomist that they're using, like myself and a couple of my other buddies. So they're a little bit farther behind, and that may come on the weed control side of it, and it especially comes to the disease side of it. If you're not actually actively out there walking your crops, and you're not going to know, and you can use the technology out there, like I said before, some of that stuff, it'll send you alarms, but it's basically, the weather says you might have this problem. Well, unless you go out there, you don't know. And when you're talking about some of these applications being, $20 to $40 an acre, you don't just want to willy-nilly go out there and throw this stuff around. And it goes back to being a steward, we don't want to use any more of this stuff than we don't have to. But a lot of my neighbors and friends that I'm really close with, we'll talk collectively and say, hey, we've seen the neighbor has this issue, or you seeing it, and that. But as far as a statewide network or no, you can say Purdue's out there, but I don't know that they're really out there helping us that much. They're like anybody else. They're a business, and they're getting governed by where their money's coming from. So, but the technology is there. I don't know whether or not on the technology side it is that accurate to be able to justify treatment expenses without actually putting your boots in the field and checking for the disease or the weed.
So it might give you a tip. It might give you a tip, but it'd be one coming outside the realm of technology anyway, because you have good relationships with your neighbors and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And back to your earlier statement, it's concerning about, could somebody affect us with, the satellite technology? Yes, they definitely could. Are they going to stop us from doing, from planting or harvesting or whatever the case may be? No, it just might be the fact that we'd have to revert back to the old ways. We're still going to do it, but we're not going to collect the data. We may not have the ability to create our prescriptions and map, by that way. We'd have to manually do it or just go out and do the best of it. But it would make a huge, huge effect on all of our bottom lines if they did.
But you know what, Eric? I mean, let's face it. We've got this, right?
Yeah.
And so the difference is that my dad would go in and he'd have to take a piece of the corn stalk into the extension office and say, what is this? You can take a picture of it, and when you're wherever, the breakfast, place or wherever you do get together with your neighbors, you could show each other pictures of it. I have an app on my phone that I could take a picture of a tree and it'll tell me what kind of tree it is. I'm sure you're leveraging that sort of technology, are you not? Or
yes, absolutely. I mean, there's different, we can use it in weed technology and things of that nature, and it's absolutely beneficial. All this stuff is great, but you kind of do this too, and I understand, but this is only as good as the signal you get. And up here in radio and cell phone nowhere land, it gets to be a little bit of a struggle.
Good point. Very good point. It's something that most of us, suffer from here in Indiana, right? So
yes, sir.
Well, Eric, we really appreciate the insights and ideas you've shared with us here today. I know that those that listen to CyberViews are really appreciating your contributions. I'm Dan Hadaway.
And I'm Eric Hulmes.
And this has been a CyberViews podcast presented by Infotex. And never forget, awareness is 9/11 to the battle.